Not the North Pole. The National Guard makes sure kids in rural Alaska enjoy some Christmas cheer. Holiday hustle. Find out how the nation's delivery services made sure gifts arrived in time for Christmas. Andreas Widmer. Christmas stories of St. John Paul II witnessed by a young Swiss Guard. And Ancient Roots. Exploring the symbolism of the Christmas tree, bringing life and light to the season. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, December 26th, 2014. It's so good to have you with us as we continue the Christmas celebration of the birth of Jesus. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, Nativity Scenes come in all shapes and sizes and flavors in Rome. Alan Holdren takes us on a Christmas tour of the 100 Nativity Scenes exhibit.
Piazza del Popolo is a hot spot for Rome's Christmas festivities. It's also a magnet for families this time of year, including the Holy Family. Just off the square is a special art show for the Christmas season. This is the 39th annual 100 Nativity Scene exhibit in Rome. There are actually 212 of them this year, including this beautiful one here from El Salvador in the international section. It's made of corn husks, as you'll see, just a unique piece. All of these were made uniquely for this exhibit. We go down the line here. There's Malta, Slovakia. There's also Peru. You see this beautiful design, different layers of a house made of terracotta with baby Jesus there in the doorway. If we think of a cultural context here in Italy and we apply that to a nativity scene, we may think pasta. And that's exactly what this artist did from Puglia, a southern region in Italy. He made this entire nativity scene of pasta, 25 different types, everything you can imagine, including lasagna. Variety is the norm here, from life-size clay models from Mexico to this Italian miniature in a clamshell. Curiosities for all ages. Nativity scenes for all tastes. The idea was born 2 generations ago by a Roman. Today, his daughter is carrying on the tradition.
Every year we had a nativity scene at home, even if it wasn't finished until a minute before midnight on Christmas Eve. So we thought to ask some artist friends if they would be able to make a show with a few crushes. It started with 20 or 30, and little by little it grew.
This year, she had to decline more than 200 entries just for lack of space. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world on this day after Christmas. We're learning from last year's failure to make deliveries in time for Christmas, due in part to bad weather. Major shippers did a whole lot better this year. They all took extra steps to ensure on-time deliveries. UPS hired 95,000 holiday workers to help deliver an estimated 585 million packages this season. FedEx added more than 50,000 workers to handle the rush, including 15 full-time meteorologists to monitor weather. The U.S. Postal Service delivered 15 billion cards, letters, and packages this Christmas season. Sunday delivery was even added in some cities to handle the extra volume. Well, again this year, Santa got help from the National Guard to make sure kids in a remote Alaska town received some Christmas cheer. The Guard's Operation Santa delivered toys, school supplies, and other goodies to remote villages. This year, the village of Shishmaref was chosen to get a visit from Old St. Nick himself. For 58 years, Operation Santa has given struggling communities some real holiday magic.
This makes Christmas for them. Were it not for Op Santa, they might not have anything.
This is really excited because it's great for the children to get a chance to see Santa and get all the nice presents and the books and ice cream.
Just one of the many examples of service to those less fortunate during this Christmas season. It's good to have our friend Dr. Matthew Bunson back with us, the author of Pope Francis. That was the first English language biography of our Holy Father. And as you put that together, this was before the year and a half that we've experienced Pope Francis. What was it that stuck out the most to you about this man who would just become our Pope?
Well, in looking back on his life, you saw so clearly how Argentinian he was. And what I mean by that is that this is somebody who grew up in the faith, in the strong faith of Latin America. Family for him is everything, and we see that in the Synod. He talks extensively about his mother, about his grandmother, about his grandfather. He talks about the fact that it was in his family environment that he learned not to swear.
I remember one day he even said, the Pope has family. It was actually after the accident
Yes.
that involved a nephew, I believe. And he says, the Pope has family. And it was just such a simple statement, but so true.
Yes, and he extended that then to the care of the families that were given into his security, into his responsibility as shepherd in Buenos Aires.
Papa.
He's Papa. He's simply Father Jorge. He's simply Father Bergoglio to so many. So when he was working in the favelas, the slums, he encountered, and there's that one of those key words of his pontificate, encounter. He encountered poverty on a breathtaking scale, and then would leave there and find wealth of a massive scale. And at the same time, the problems of both groups, of both sets of families, the poor who could not find clothing and water, food, and the wealthy who seemed to have everything, but who suffered from what he calls spiritual poverty, where they had high rates of suicide and addiction. So as he came into the papacy, he was very much aware of all of these external and internal pressures on the family, and I think it has informed very much his pontificate.
And he also came from the Jesuit formation, so I'm sure that had quite a bit of influence.
It did. I mean, he spent 10 years in formation as a Jesuit. He did the spiritual exercises, the full 30-day spiritual exercises that were established.
Intense. That is intense.
He's done them twice.
My goodness.
So here's somebody who is powerful in his capacity for discernment, for understanding the spiritual life. And you can see how that undergirds so much of his daily life, the simplicity, the detachment, and his commitment to prayer. I mean, this is somebody who gets up at 4:30, sometimes 3:30 in the morning to make certain that he has time for the rosary, for adoration, for Mass, for the divine office.
Very much like John Paul II.
Very much.
We did that. I'm so surprised you talked about simplicity. I'd love the simplicity when he's asked, who are you? And he said, I'm a sinner.
Yes.
I mean, how much more simple can you get?
Right.
And how true of all of us. And don't you think that's part of what endears him to so many now after he's been the Pope for not even 2 years?
Well, it's the humility, it's the simplicity, but beneath all of that, and what does he stress? He stresses mercy, God's loving mercy. I used the word encounter a minute ago. He talks about fostering an encounter with Jesus Christ. But he also talks relentlessly about mercy, bringing God's loving mercy into the world, of helping people to find it, who in so many cases, in so many places, simply can't find what they think is truly a merciful existence.
And yet there's still some who see that emphasis on God's mercy almost as being too soft as a leader. And yet we all believe in that. If we didn't, we'd really be in a hard way, wouldn't we?
We would. Go back to his closing speech at the Synod, where he, and this is picking up themes that he's also talked about in his first year and a half, where on the one hand we can't be too merciful, but on the other hand we can't be merciless. Finding that road between them, what is authentic mercy and authentic justice. He used that beautiful image from Scripture, from the Gospels, of being at risk of taking stones and turning them into bread, but at the same time taking bread, turning it into stones, he said, and hurling at sinners.
So here's a man who obviously hasn't changed who he is since he was elected Pope.
Right.
But there's no doubt that he recognizes now that he has the attention of the world. What is he doing with that, in your opinion?
Yeah, he's using it in a powerfully prophetic way. He's very much aware of his influence on the world stage. He's very comfortable with himself. You know, one of the questions that was asked at the time of the conclave that elected him was, whoever was following Benedict not only had to assume the burden of the papacy of 1 billion souls, and indeed the whole world on his shoulders, but had to succeed the first pope who had resigned in centuries.
Very unusual.
Francis was comfortable immediately with that task, and somebody who really captured the imagination, not by tricks, not by media stunts, not by good branding, but by being truly authentic, by proclaiming God's loving mercy, by going back to the proclamation of the gospel, and as he says, taking that out into the world.
And I love the interactions that we see between Francis and Benedict. And I saw it portrayed in one media account recently as it was more of a show to try to kind of wipe away these sharp divisions. It's not. There's a genuineness about the love between those two men.
Yes.
That's very striking.
I go back to the first few days after his election when he went by helicopter to Castel Gandolfo and embraced
Beautiful
Benedict.
image.
They prayed in the chapel. It was jarring for anyone who studies papal history to see two men dressed in white like that. But since then, he's used the great phrase that Pope Benedict must not be something in a museum, that he is alive. And who else in the world, other than Benedict, can possibly understand what Francis has to deal with on a daily basis?
I bet they spend some very interesting and close moments together.
They do.
All right, Dr. Matthew Bunsen, who wrote the book, Pope Francis. We always appreciate the time we spend with you. Thank you, Matthew.
It's a privilege to be with you.
And that conversation with my dear friend, Dr. Matthew Bunsen, obviously was recorded earlier in the year. We appreciate Dr. Bunsen. Thanks for watching. Coming up, a Christmas story about St. John Paul the Great directly from one of his Swiss Guards.
From the Vatican Embassy, on behalf of the Holy Father, I extend to you and the EWTN News Nightly family our warm best wishes for a blessed and peace-filled Christmas.
Archbishop Vigano, thank you, and a blessed Christmas. And thank you for watching EWTN News Nightly on this Friday, December 26th, in the Christmas season. I'm Brian Patrick. 3/4 of Americans say they believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, this according to a Pew survey. It was conducted last year and also shows fewer people taking part in traditional holiday activities. 92% of those questions said, as children, their family put up a Christmas tree. Only 79% do that now. The number of people sending Christmas cards has dropped from 81% to 65%. 54% say they attend Christmas services, whereas 69% used to go to midnight mass or some other service. And Christmas caroling is way off. Only 16% of Americans say they go around the neighborhood singing carols. And get this, asked what they liked least about Christmas, the most common answer from those surveyed was commercialism or materialism. It's great to have Andreas Widmer with us. He, of course, was the Swiss Guard as a young man protecting St. John Paul II. And you met this saint of all times, of all days, on Christmas Eve.
Exactly. It was an amazing grace for me to do that. You know, I went into the Swiss Guards without, I want to say for all the wrong reasons. So I thought being a bodyguard was about the coolest thing you could do. And so, you know, I'm a cultural Catholic, and I go there just for those reasons, for being a bodyguard. And then I met him right what I would want to call the perfect storm in my life. So I play this big guy and tough guy, and I go there.
You're dressed in all those colors.
And, you know, and yeah, I'm dressed in all these colors. I realized at some point, I realized that what I'm doing there is in a way played. You know, I come there, I get in, I see that in effect, I don't really know what I'm doing. What led to this is the first time that I had to serve there was a week or two too early, in a sense, that the sergeant comes to me and says, "You're going to work today," and where I was still off, I wasn't even supposed to work, and they wouldn't hear anything other than saying, "You're going to work," and that was Christmas Eve. Now in Europe, where I come from, Christmas Eve is really the day of celebrating Christmas. And so this guy just took my Christmas Eve away. This is like taking your Christmas away. So you're going to work and not just work, you work all night. You know, you are reported at 8 o'clock. I was so devastated.
So what happens then on Christmas Eve?
So I stand out there, and it was the perfect storm. I'm standing out there in front. So the Pope has an apartment, and right outside of the apartment is a small room where the guard stands, and they have a key to both sides to his apartment and out to the loggia. I'm standing in there. I was so angry with myself. You know how you can accuse yourself of all these, you don't know what you're doing, and these people don't like you. And honestly, I cried my eyes out up there. It was a dark room, and I'm just like losing it. Nothing ever happens up there. So I just stood there and cried.
You were alone on Christmas Eve.
Absolutely. And then the radio goes off, and the commander is on, and he says, Widmer, the Pope is going to leave is going to go celebrate midnight mass, and he's going to use your door, your exit to go, and let him out. And I said, I guess I can let him out. I turned the key. I just had enough time to stand back and stand up straight, pull my uniform straight, and out comes John Paul. And this big door opens, and it's just him, and he stands in this doorway with this beautiful light coming into my dark little room. And he looked at me. He stood in the doorway, and he looked at me. And whenever he was interested in something, he would tilt his head a bit. And he pointed at me.
I've seen that look.
He said, "You're new. I've never met you." And I said, "Well, Holy Father, my name is Andreas." I was so speechless, I basically gave him my social security number. So he comes forward and he stretches out his hand. And I look down and our hands meet, and then he looks up and our eyes meet. And I, of course, had eyes like this from crying. And I knew right away, that blew my cover. And he immediately noticed, and he didn't ask, he just said, "Of course, this is your first Christmas away from home, isn't it?" That was the wrong thing to say to me. Like a tear comes down and tears come down. I couldn't say anything. And he just pulled me in, and he held me with his other arm. And he looked me, he had these beautiful light gray eyes, and he looked me in the eyes and says, "Well, you know, Andreas, I want to thank you for what you're doing and for the sacrifice you're doing tonight. I'm going to pray. I'm going to celebrate Mass and pray for you tonight."
Wow. So you're around 20 years old or so. This is in the 80s. Yeah. He's still a very vibrant man. I saw that gaze the very first time he came to Chicago. I covered that visit, and our eyes met that same way. I was a young guy, and I'll never forget that look. How has that relationship with St. John Paul II affected the leadership that you have now taken in the church?
That most simple of encounters showed me that what counts in leadership is only one thing, and it's the person-to-person encounter. When you lead, you don't lead a team, you lead individuals. And when you lead individuals, you have, you know, he used to say, when you love somebody, in Italian it's called ti voglio bene, I want your good. Well, do you want their good? What's the good you want for them that you lead? As leaders, he would say, I want the good for you, eternal happiness. I want heaven for you. And what am I doing in my leadership to help you get to heaven?
And now you are doing that at Catholic University of America as a professor and a mentor.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting that now I was mentored by, of all people, by John Paul II in that sense that he showed me the faith, and he wasn't afraid to ask me, are you praying? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Now I'm finding myself meeting with students. And we, as Catholic, we don't call it, the advisors or other people now, the professors are mentors now. And we're supposed to take an integral view of the human person of our students. And so I have the freedom to say, well, how's your spiritual life going? You know, I'm a business professor. I run the entrepreneurship program. And I get to talk to the students. And recently one of the students says, you know, I really have a hard time praying and to make sense of God. And I think back and I think of John Paul and say, what is the advice he gave me? And it's my privilege to hand on that advice.
And your book is The Pope and the CEO, I guess could be renamed The Saint and the CEO.
It's just so humbling.
If you want to read more about this amazing story, that book is, of course, available worldwide, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and Emmaus Press is my publisher. And I'd love for you to get a copy.
All right, Andreas Widmer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And a blessed Christmas season to you.
Same to you
and
all.
your family.
Thank you.
And I've read that remarkable book. Obviously, again, that interview was done earlier in the year. It was really great to go back and watch it. What an incredible story. Up next, Jason Calvi looks at the roots of the tradition of the Christmas tree.
A wonderful Merry Christmas to the viewers of EWTN News Nightly. And this Christmas, think about the word presence. And it's not P-R-E-S-E-N-T-S, but P-R-E-S-E-N-C-E. Because Christmas is about the presence of Christ in our lives in this world. It's also asking us to be present in a different way to people in our lives. So let's think presence
What a beautiful message on this day after Christmas. Thanks for joining us on Friday, December 26th. I'm Brian Patrick, and more than 1,000 people gathered recently in Utah to set a new Guinness record for the largest live nativity scene. The giant event was produced into a music video for the Piano Guys website, a group of musicians striving to make a positive impact on others.
Angels from the realms of glory, wing your flight o'er all the earth.
The record-breaking event recreated the Bethlehem scene with 1,039 people dressed as angels, wise men, shepherds, and religious royalty. A camel, donkey, and several sheep were also featured in the giant interfaith production. This tops last year's record of 898 people in a nativity display in the UK. What a beautiful depiction of the birth of Jesus. Well, the National Christmas Tree here in Washington adds much needed light to these dreary DC December days. That day, and the ones in our homes this year, follow an old, deep tradition. Jason Calvi shares with us the history of the Christmas tree.
3, 2, 1.
Oh, National Christmas Tree, a grounded past, 9 decades in the making.
Dates back to 1923 when President Calvin Coolidge walked across from the White House here to the Ellipse and lit a tree from Vermont, his native state.
Through the years, the tree has gone up at several locations around the White House.
In the distance is a 60-foot spruce, which at the president's touch is illuminated with 9,000 lights.
And it's gone dark during national tragedies, like parts of World War II and during the Iran hostage crisis. The current tree is actually living. The 29-foot Colorado blue spruce was planted here in 2012.
And surrounding the national Christmas tree, hundreds of feet from the White House, are these little trees representing each of the states. But the tradition of the Christmas tree has much deeper roots.
History logs stories of bringing a tree inside.
So in the middle of a northern winter, lots of snowfall, you had a pine tree, a spruce tree, or a holly tree saying, "Don't be afraid. We guarantee that spring will be back. We've kept our leaves. We've kept green."
Jesuit Father Ronald Murphy is the author of a book explaining the pre-Christian Northern European legend of a tree rescuing humans at the end of time. He says missionaries converted that legend to explain Christianity.
We do believe that the cross performs that function, and we do believe that the church performs that function.
Catholics in places like Norway built churches resembling trees.
From roughly, let's say, 1150.
Father Murphy says decorations were added to the indoor trees by the 1600s. And today, about 80% of Americans put a tree up in their own homes, according to a 2013 Pew poll, and as seen in public places like on Capitol Hill.
2, 1.
And at the White House, celebrations growing for 2,000 years.
It's the story of hope. The birth of a singular child into the simplest of circumstances. A child who would grow up to live a life of humility and kindness and compassion.
In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for joining us on this Friday, the day after Christmas, and we pray that you are enjoying peace and joy with your family and friends this Christmas season. Of course, it is a season, so we get to celebrate for a while. We will be back on Monday. Until then, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching. Merry Christmas. And we asked you to send in family Christmas pictures, so we leave you tonight with some of the photos that you sent to us with your Christmas family. Good night, and may God bless you.